Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Khaleeda Shaheera binti ROSZAILI, students of Industrial Chemical Technologies in USIM. Today I want to share about the control measure in technical control in CHRA. Okay, what is control measure? Control measures are taken to prevent risk from the use of chemical hazardous to health or CHTH. Okay, there are three types of control measure. First, technical controls, organizational controls, and emergency response preparedness. Okay, the regulatory requirements of occupational safety and health or use and standard of exposure of chemical hazardous to health, or we call as a USECHH or usage regulations. Okay, technical control measure follow a hierarchy that begins. First, today I want to talk about the technical control. My part is technical control. So technical control measure follow a hierarchy that begins with eliminating the chemical hazardous to health. Then substitution, total enclosure of process and handling system. Next, isolation, modification of the process parameters. Next, application of engineering control equipment. And lastly, provision of personal protective equipment. Okay, this is the overview of what I'm going to talk about the technical control. First, we go with the elimination, substitution, total enclosure, isolation, modification of the process parameters, application of engineering control equipment, and lastly, provision of personal protective equipment or PPE. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. The first technical control is elimination. Okay, we go to the elimination first. So what is elimination? Elimination is where the total removal of a CHTH or chemical hazardous to health by the process not involving CHTH, which is redesign the task of a CHTH so that the hazard will eliminated. Okay, the process of elimination must consider where the process involve the use of CHTH. Okay, there are three examples of elimination. First, we must use ultrasonic cleaning for a physical process instead of we use chemical process to clean an object. Okay, when we want to clean an object, we must use a physical process instead of we use the chemical process. So the next example is using clips or clamps instead of adhesive. Okay, next, the last example is purchase the material that already cut in a size form. Second, we go to the substitution. Okay, substitution includes substituting a CHTH with a less hazardous one, using a chemical in a less hazardous form, or using the same chemical which a lower risk process. Okay, next point, substitution must consider for CHTH that are carcinogenic, reproductive toxins, or neurotoxic. Okay, this is the most effective approach and always preferable to protect the worker from it. So, what it means that substitution is the most effective approach that always preferable to protect worker from any hazardous. Okay, substitution can take two forms, which is first substitution of process and substitution of chemicals. Okay, first substitution of the process, where the substitution of manual spraying to automation process. Okay, substitution of chemicals is a substitution organic solvent to water-based decreasing agent. Okay, to obtain optimum result from this substitution, both form of substitution should be utilized.
Thirdly, total enclosure of process and handling system.
So, total enclosure. Total enclosure totally enclosing the process and handling system, emitting the chemical hazardous to health that can prevent their release into the work environment. So, the example of total enclosure is include automated operation and closed loop sampling system. That is example of the total enclosed that can apply at the workplace.
Next, we go to the isolation.
Okay, next I'm gonna explain about the isolation of the work to control the emission of chemical hazardous to health. Okay, application of the principle of isolation is consisting of installation of a physical barrier between hazardous operation and the workers. Okay, isolation can be achieved by segregation, either by physical barrier of the hazardous work. Okay, next we're gonna talk about the example. So the example of isolation is relocating spray painting process away from highly populated area.
Then we go to the modification, the process of parameters.
Okay, what is modification? So the process of modification is parameters such as temperature, pressure, and flow rate can be modified to reduce the release of chemical hazardous to health at the workplace. So that means modification is things such as temperature, pressure, and flow rate that can reduce chemical hazardous to health in the workplace. Okay, the example of the modification is we can use a lower operating temperature or pressure to minimize the release of chemical hazardous to health into the work environment or the work place.
The second last of technical control is application of engineering control equipment.
Okay, engineering controls are process or equipment that minimize the generation of chemical hazardous to health or contain chemical hazardous to health, which limit the area of contamination in the event of leaks. Okay, the type of engineering control are local exhaust ventilation, general ventilation, and water spray. Okay, there is one example for engineering control, which is we use robotic welding, extraction system attached to the grinding machine, ventilated booth for spray painting. Okay, that is for example of engineering control that we can apply at the workplace to prevent the chemical hazards to help to workers.
Lastly is provision of personal protective equipment or PPE.
Okay, I know everyone know about the personal protective equipment or PPE, but not everyone know where and when we can wear the PPE. So here I want to explain about the PPE. Okay, minimization of risk through the provision and use of PPE is the lowest rank in the hierarchy of the control. So provision of PPE include the proper selection, correct fit, proper use care, and maintenance and availability of replacement when required. Okay, the use of PPE as a control measure shall be limited to situations where other control measures are not practicable or where PPE is used in a conjunction with other measures to increase the protection. Okay, I know everyone know about the PPE, but not everyone know where and what kind of situation that can allow us to wear the PPE. Okay, situation where use of suitable PPE may be necessary when exposure, when during the maintenance, and lastly when urgent action. Okay, when exposure, where the exposure must be reduced as far as practicable by other measurement. Okay, next, during the maintenance, where the operation is not frequent or involve small of number of people. Okay, the lastly, where urgent action is required because of plant failure. Okay, that's all about the PPE. Okay, guys, I hope that all of us, even workers or students, that we always work with chemical that very harmful to us, will take the prevention risk from the use of chemical hazardous to help to even ourselves. Okay, I hope that my explanation and sharing today will give benefits to all of us out there, to take more serious action when we work or handle the chemical. So that's all from me. Thank you for watching my video, and Assalamualaikum.